YouTube, what is good? My name is Ribs and you're watching Ribs Doing Film Things. Every week I make videos about film photography, so if you're interested, please go ahead and subscribe. Today we're going to talk about panorama film cameras. A panoramic film camera is simply one that achieves a large panoramic image across a large image size. Typically, this image size is specific to a wide aspect ratio, meaning the photo is much wider than it is tall. If you compare this to a regular 35mm negative, you'll notice that a panoramic negative is going to be significantly larger than that normal 35mm size. Instead of the typical 36x24mm aspect ratio, you're going to have something that's probably much wider and perhaps even taller and wider. The most sought after film camera when it comes to panoramic cameras is the Hasselblad XPAN. That camera is fantastic and is built for purpose for shooting panorama images with 35mm negatives. The only problem is that camera is wildly expensive. If you go on eBay, they probably cost around $3,000 nowadays, so it's basically a non-starter for most of us. The good news is there's quite a few alternatives. Each does have its own pros and cons, but nonetheless will help you achieve that panoramic film look that is so highly sought after. Alright, so first up is this guy, the Veronica ETRS with the 135W film bag. The ETRS is a modular medium format film camera. It's built for purpose to shoot with various options, and in this case, there's actually a 35mm negative option. You can actually buy a film bag that was designed to fit 35mm film and it shoots in a wider panoramic aspect ratio as compared to the normal 35mm aspect ratio. The 135W film bag is fantastic because it's not a hack. It is a real piece of tech that was created for that purpose. Therefore, unlike some of the other options we'll discuss, this one you're not messing around and you don't really have to guess at anything. You just put the negative into the actual 135 holder and there you go. You've got panoramic film images on 35mm film. The great thing about this setup is that it's very portable and like I said, it's very fit to purpose. There's no guesswork, it just works well and it's designed for that exact purposes. The images are really cool too, and it's great to have such an easy option, such a modular option with lots of lenses to shoot panoramic images. The only downside to this setup is the price. The film bag alone is about $400 US, which is a lot of money, especially considering the camera with the lens and the normal 120 film bag is probably around $300. So it's not a cheap alternative to an XPAN, but it definitely is much cheaper than the XPAN. If you've got about $1,000 to play, it would actually be great to get the full ETRS system with some 120 film bags, the 135 film bag, and maybe 2 lenses. All things considered, I highly recommend this option given the ease and comfort in shooting this 35mm panorama film. Alright, option number 2. The Holga WPC120 pinhole camera. The Holga pinhole camera is just so much fun to use. I cannot stress it enough. Pinhole photography is just such a relaxing way to take some fantastic images without too much fuss and a little bit of planning. This particular Holga panoramic camera gives you 2 options for panoramic style images. The first one is a 6x9 medium format image, and the second one is a 6x12 medium format image. When you compare the same exact view on a 35mm film, it just does not compare at all. The 6x9 pinhole image is going to be so much bigger than the small 35mm image. I really like this Holga panoramic camera. However, there are some things you need to be aware of. First and foremost, you need to use a tripod with this camera. Without it, you just will not be able to get an image. A pinhole camera requires a tripod. Second is you will need to plan accordingly in terms of daylight. You want to limit what kind of ISO film you use in order to ensure that your exposures aren't insanely long. And lastly, this camera produces 6x9 negatives, which means you only get 8 shots to a roll of 120 film. On the bright side, this camera is very small, light, and portable. You can literally take it anywhere. If you're going on a trip where you're kind of relaxing and just have all the time in the world, why not bring this camera and see what you can get? Last but not least is the Zeiss Ikon Netter. This is one of my favorite cameras that I own. The Zeiss Ikon Netter is one of the film cameras that I've had for the longest. This particular copy is 6x9, putting it into the medium format panoramic camera style. It's fantastic because again, with 6x9 you get such large images. Additionally, the Zeiss Ikon Netter does have a real lens, therefore the images are actually fairly sharp, especially when you stop the lens down. This camera is very antique, so you want to keep that in mind when shooting, just knowing that you're not going to get the most super tack sharp images possible. Nonetheless, you get very workable images that have plenty of detail. This panoramic camera can be adapted to 35mm film as well. You do need to buy the film adapters in order to hold the film inside of the camera, but nonetheless, it works pretty well. There are a couple things to consider with this camera though. The viewing window in the back must be covered if you're shooting 35mm film. If you're not shooting 35 and you're using 120, then that's okay, you can leave it open. In fact, leaving it open will help you see how much film you have wound and what shot you're on. With 35mm film, you can't count your shots. You have to do that in your head and estimate when winding the film. If you don't do it properly, what you'll end up with images that are overlapping and therefore not full panoramic style. The Zeiss Ikon editor is great because it doesn't require any batteries or any fancy anything in order to use it. So this camera is generally quite cheap given that it's very old. You can find it on eBay for around $50 depending on which specific model you get. No, there are 6x9 models, but there are also 6x6 models. So be careful when selecting the one that you want. I just love this camera. To me, it's a piece of history. This camera is basically 80 years old, and to have something in possession that's that old is just amazing. Would I recommend this camera? Most definitely. It's very versatile and it gives you a couple different options to work with. On top of that, it's just so easy to bring around and doesn't require much space in your bag. Alright YouTube, so now that you've seen the options, I want you to tell me which option you would prefer. If you are going on a trip or if you're just needing a walk around panoramic camera, which one of these three would you choose? Leave me a comment and let me know what you think. If you found this video useful and entertaining, please give me a like, I'd really appreciate it. And if you want to see more videos like this, definitely go ahead and subscribe as I release a video every single week. That's what I got for today. Thanks for tuning in to Ribs Doing Film Things. Peace.